Hello, fellow mech warriors, Mage Leader here. Welcome back to the Battle Mech Primer, the series where I pretend to know more than people who've been in this gig for longer than I've been alive. Today, I'm going to try something a little different. Typically, when I make one of these mini lectures, I give basic facts, statistics, and a touch of backstory before telling you the practical application of a given battle mech. Today's topic, however, isn't really one where I can reliably do that. Why? Well, because today's mech isn't really a battle mech in the typical sense. It is a concept, a test bed, a machine that was never truly intended to see battle. There are precious few records of it, and even fewer holovid or photo recordings. It barely went into full production, as that wasn't its intended purpose, but I believe that it still has educational value despite its obscurity, not to mention I promised to tell you its story in my previous video. Today, we're going to take a look at the Nodachi. As the name implies, the Nodachi is a Kiritan mech, which instantly makes it cringe and bad, but there's several layers to unpack here beyond my innate Rasahagian desire to dunk on the Draconis Combine. As I said, the Nodachi was never meant to see battle, which is why it's all weapons and very little protection despite its weight. The Nodachi is what we call a test bed. A test bed, in layman's terms, is essentially a vehicle meant for the purpose of testing various weapon systems before they get strapped onto the real things. They can be anything from retired or obsolete hardware to purpose-built prototypes, but the purpose is always the same. They exist not as weapons in and of themselves, but rather for the purpose of proving or disproving theoretical concepts. Some of you are probably nodding along and know where this is going. A prototype mech? Only a handful ever produced? It's built to look like a fucking samurai by a bunch of weebs? Why, that sounds like... Gundam Kido Senshi Gundam. No, stop that. Get that idea out of your head entirely. The Nodachi is not some mystical, long-lost wonder weapon that can single-handedly turn the tides of war. The Draconis Combine isn't some magical place where they build machines out of bullshitium and instantly get the design so perfect that they outclass enemy innovations despite being decades behind in technology. Mobile Suit Gundam and its ilk are often closer to fantasy than to science fiction for one simple reason. The damn thing never breaks. Not one software hiccup, not one Myomer malfunction, not a single bug in its balancing system. It goes into its first fight with a computer so advanced that it can fend off the enemy's superhuman ace pilot on its own, a computer that's never even been field tested. Real prototypes never behave this way, and the Nodachi is most definitely a realistic prototype. By that I mean that it's a massive pile of shit that would disintegrate if forced into real combat. So if the Nodachi isn't meant for battle, then what is it meant for? Well, luckily for us, the Nodachi's story is considerably more interesting than the misadventures of some teenage nerd and his slap-happy commander. It involves an arms race, and one of the strangest ones in the Inner Sphere's history. Melee is nothing new in battle mech combat. Hell, the Machi's first ever weapons test involved the thing stomping on a tank, but with a few exceptions, the majority of battle mechs were not made with melee in mind. A few, such as the Marauder and King Crab, accounted for the tactic, but the idea of having a dedicated melee weapon was largely considered impractical. Mech-scale weapons tended to be large and unwieldy, and for centuries the most you might find on a mech was something akin to a battle fist, which is little more than a slab of metal designed for punching. Think of it as brass knuckles for giant robots. Things changed, however, when a certain madman by the name of Dr. B. Banzai decided to change the game. Team Banzai is... well, they're an odd bunch. Not a ton is known about this obscure little mercenary unit, other than the fact that its commander is something of a mad scientist. While I don't have time to cover him in depth, I can assure you that what came next was something only he would be insane enough to come up with. The Hatchet Man is what happens when you give a mech designer just a little too much cocaine and a handful of Paul Bunyan storybooks. It's an interesting battle mech for a number of reasons, not the least of which involves its introduction. The Hatchet Man was designed as an ambush predator, and so on its first combat deployment, it was sent in when the conditions favored it. A unit of Lyran regulars armed with the machine surprised the 4th Proserpina Hussars during a raid on Severin. The Lyrans hid in the city, let the Hussars wander in, then jumped out and started hacking away with their hatchets. The result was one of the most successful ambushes in the history of warfare, but that wasn't the only thing that made the event significant. The Hatchet Man was also the first totally new battle mech designed and produced in the Inner Sphere since the Succession Wars, and its appearance scared the shit out of the Draconis Combine. But in typical Drac fashion, they missed the entire point of the debacle. Did they adapt their tactics to match the Lyrans, luring in their enemies and ambushing them with close-range weapons? Did they perhaps see the Hatchet Man for what it was, a niche and situational weapon that struggles in open battle? Nope. They took one look at the Hatchet Man and said, "Ah so, it have big axe. If we give our mechs a weapon like that, then we will be unstoppable." So they came up with their own version of the Hatchet. But they didn't copy the Lyrans, of course, they just had to go and put a weeb spin on it. No, the Kuretans developed a giant fuck-off katana, and testing on the new concept began almost immediately. The development contract was secured by the Cosby Battlemech research firm, and you'll never guess what it was they were known for doing. They would be the ones to design, test, and ultimately produce the sword and triple-strength Myomer required to wield it. However, before any of that, they had a slight problem to work out. There were no battle mechs readily available that could easily be modified to test both concepts, and so Cosby would design their own testbed in-house. The result was the Nodachi, a 70-ton battle mech of dubious quality. It was known to be on the temperamental side, a somewhat slapdash machine despite the cutting-edge tech that it boasted. The initial models were built entirely around the sword and TSM, with secondary weapons that served more as ways to generate heat for the Myomer than for their damage potential. Its loadout is somewhat schizophrenic, with a sword, an ERPPC, 2 MRM-20s, an SRM-4, an SRM-2, and a single medium laser. This unfocused armament isn't due to incompetence, however, not at all. Everything the Nodachi carries is something it was in the process of testing. Despite its underwhelming armor, its needlessly high top speed, and its scatterbrain equipment, the Nodachi is not a bad machine. It is, as I said before, merely a platform for seeing what works and what doesn't. The Nodachi served Cosby well, and for many years, they tried all manner of tweaks and modifications to improve the Draconis Combine's battle mech technology, and some of these experiments almost didn't fail. Unfortunately for Cosby, who had thrown so much money at the project, the battlemech sword concept never caught on to the extent that they had hoped. Melee weapons at the battlemech scale are niche and often impractical. Very few mechs today carry such weapons, and there's a good reason for that. They weigh a significant amount, often replacing more versatile weapons with ones that require close proximity. TSM, while more popular, was already spreading across the Inner Sphere, and Cosby was coming into the market too late to turn a profit. So while the initial technology that formed the genesis of the Nodachi fell out of favor, the mech itself carried on. Cosby continued to test all manner of oddball weapons, computer upgrades, structural overhauls, and literal thousands of concepts using the design. They even put the mech into production, marketing it as an infighter, but without the armor to protect itself up close, it never gained any mainstream popularity. Cosby was bleeding money, and though the Nodachi performed admirably in their tests, it was starting to exhibit some issues. It was unintuitive, quirky, and the sheer number of tweaks and modifications over the years began to cause them to break down. The production models were known to be unreliable, as they had been built for experimentation first and foremost. So what's a battlemech manufacturer to do when they sink all their money into a bunch of dead-end projects and fail to turn a profit on their only recent mech design? Well, fortunately for Cosby, there was a solution, and all they had to do was the exact opposite of what they'd been doing previously. Rather than try and push the envelope, Cosby went back to the old classics and selected something else to start producing. After some back and forth, they eventually settled on a classic, and soon enough Cosby branded Crusaders began to roll off the assembly lines and into wider circulation. This would ultimately save them from bankruptcy, though getting over the hump proved to be challenging at first. The Nodachi had given Cosby a reputation for shoddy design and unreliable machines, and a stigma like that alone is enough to sink minor arms companies. However, Cosby would inevitably rebuild their reputation over time, since it's pretty hard to fuck up a Crusader. As I covered before, it's one of the easiest battle mechs to get right, and the company's choice of this mech in particular was a stroke of manufacturing genius that any other mech producer can respect. And so this is where the story of the Nodachi comes to a close. It still pops up from time to time, particularly in the Solaris circuit, where its distinctive appearance and modability make it a true crowd pleaser, but on the battlefield, it's all but extinct. But I would argue that that's okay, since that was never meant to be its true home. The Nodachi did exactly what it was meant to do, to be a framework that would allow a bunch of crazy space weebs to strap wacky shit on it in the hopes that something would work right. While nothing revolutionary was ever developed on it, Cosby took many of the lessons they learned while using the Nodachi and applied them to their line of Crusaders, and in that way it has a legacy that still lives on. Little things here and there, like the battle computer's operating system UI, the sirens for incoming missiles, the improved gyro response time, the ergonomics of the control yoke, and dozens of other little details make up the ghost of the Nodachi, which you can still feel if you ever get the chance to drive a Cosby Crusader. So, while the mech itself was a jumbled mess of a prototype, much like many other machines in human history, it paved the way for greater things to follow after it. Because in real life, the prototype isn't a wonder weapon that outclasses everything else in the field that then has to be tuned down so that mere mortals can use it. In the real world, prototypes are often held together with nothing more than scotch tape, prayer, and a loose application of general physics. The purpose of a prototype isn't to blow everyone away with its immediate capability, but rather to demonstrate that a barely functional concept is worth the resources needed to make it practical. This is what the Nodachi did, and that's why it shouldn't be forgotten, no matter how badly it performs in the field. So if you find one in circulation, do us all a favor. Take it off the battle line and donate it to a museum. Who knows? With the Nodachi on public display, all it takes is one school field trip to inspire the next generation of innovators, and the Nodachi provides everyone willing to look an example of the strengths and pitfalls of trying just a little too hard. Thank you all so much for watching, and special thanks to my mech warriors. Desert Dragon, Lil Grunt 1, Rostran Targo, Zero, Sean Herr, Delphino, Alexander Heimerl, Chef Sung, Delta 505, Military Sticks, Spacer, Arcos Raid, Kyle Vidari, Tomoyaga Tudor, Gary Moses Sweeney, and Admiral Chirino. If you would like to join the ranks, then feel free to join via the link in the description. Your support keeps the engines running and the soldiers fed, and I am grateful for every last C-bill. Thank you once again, and until next time, this is Mage Leader, signing off.